It's been 15 years, I think, since the founding of X. And not everyone talks about moonshot factories. So I thought maybe you could bring to life for us what that means, sort of how X works, and some of the projects.
Absolutely. So again, thank you so much for having us here. We're absolutely delighted to be here with everyone. So X's mission is to invent and launch moonshot technologies that can make the world a radically better place. And we also we sit at the intersection of purpose and profit. So our goal very much is to create profitable, self-sustaining businesses. We call ourselves a moonshot factory, and it's a pretty deliberate choice of words because it's a factory because we're really trying to systematize innovation in a repeatable way. And of course, Moonshots was inspired by Kennedy's aspiration to put a person on the moon in a decade, which at the time seemed impossible. We talk about moonshots, but not everybody knows exactly what that even means. So essentially, every single one of our moonshots follows the same blueprint that has three aspects to it. So first, we identify a huge problem in the world. Something, if solved, could positively impact the lives of millions or even billions of people around the planet. Second, we come up with a radical solution to that problem, something that may seem almost like science fiction sounding, impossible sounding. And then third, we endeavor to invent a breakthrough technology, something that can take that sci-fi sounding idea and turn it into reality over a 5 to 10 year time horizon. Now, we may not know exactly how to invent it yet, but we at least have an inkling that it may be possible. And so that forms sort of the basis for every single one of our moonshots. A picture speaks 1,000 words, and so we thought that Ivo and I are now going to take you through just some examples of moonshots that have come out of X, and we thought we'd actually flash up a few pictures. So, first off, and clicker is, there we go. All right, so I'm guessing most people are familiar with one of the first moonshots that came out of X. So this is one of our earliest prototypes of a Waymo car. It's called the Firefly. And I love this because the guy who's in the car, driving the car, I guess the car's driving itself, it's a guy called Steve who's blind. So this was his first solo drive. What was the problem that we're trying to solve here? So there's over 1 million people that are killed in road accidents every year, and the vast majority of those are caused by human error. And so the breakthrough tech is basically to create an autonomous vehicle. And I'm delighted that the Waymo team has now driven 100 million miles on physical roads already. And I think they're servicing something like 250,000 paid rides every single week.
How many people here?
How many people have had a Waymo ride? Wow, big number. So they're expanding into a number of cities and just announced that they're moving to London, which is my hometown. And this image just gives you a sense of like what the Waymo car actually sees. So even though it's not really seeing, this is what the sensors are picking up. Moving on, so another of our moonshots is called Wing. So this is our drone delivery service. The challenge they were trying to tackle is last mile delivery. So there's a tremendous amount of friction. It's pretty inefficient. And so the team thought, well, what if we could get off the ground and actually have autonomous vehicles flying and delivering? And so the team at Wing have partnered now with Walmart in a number of cities around the country where they're able to deliver, whether it's like medicines or, whatever anybody might need at the click of a button. I was actually in Dallas-Fort Worth a few months ago, and just a few clicks on my phone, and I managed to get something delivered in 10 minutes. So it was a pretty seamless experience. This image is from downtown London, where they were delivering blood supplies from one NHS hospital to another. Now, if they'd done it via road, with streets of London, the traffic, it would have taken like 45 minutes. This could be done in 10, 15 minutes. So it can really make a difference to sort of patient health. And during Hurricane Helene, where there were roads that were completely inaccessible, thanks to Wing's partnership with Walmart, they were able to deliver prescriptions and like baby formula, things that people really desperately needed when it wasn't possible to access them by road. Moving on. So this is an image of one of our Loon balloons. So Loon was our moonshot in the connectivity space. And I put this one up, even though this is one that failed for a couple of different reasons. It was the right problem space for us to be going after, because a third of the world's population still remains unconnected. And the technology actually worked. So we were able to beam internet between balloons and down to the ground, but the techno-economics just didn't work out. It wasn't going to end up being a sustainable business. But this is a great example of one of the sort of core parts of our philosophy, which is never to throw anything away. When we work on a moonshot, even if it doesn't work out, the tech works, so can it come back in another form? And that's exactly what happened. So here it is. So we ended up leveraging the technology and putting it in a different form factor. So you can see this guy mounting a terminal on a rooftop, and what we were able to do, we're now able to do with this new company called Tara, is beam internet from point to point. So they can do, very, very high speed, cheap, abundant internet in a way that is affordable and makes for an exciting business model as well. So they just spun out of X earlier this year, so we're excited about what the Tara team is doing. A couple of other examples, and then I'm going to hand over to Ivo. So we also pursued a moonshot in the agriculture space. And the problem here is that I think there are going to be 2 billion people more on the planet by 2050, which means we're going to have to ramp up food production by 70%. Which is a huge challenge. And so we wanted to figure out whether we could arm farmers with much more intelligence about individual plant health, and really at the individual plant level, so that they can make determinations on yields and when and how much to water or use pesticides or whatever it may be. But I love this image because this is one of our earliest prototypes of a rover. Think of it almost like a robot that goes through the fields and gathers intelligence about plants. And it is a critical part of our process to be as fast and as scrappy as possible when we have an idea that we want to test. So the team literally put together this metal frame. They took apart bicycles and slapped the wheels onto this frame and bought off-the-shelf cameras and hooked it up to a computer just to see whether their idea of plant perception was even possible. And once they figured out that it worked, and we worked really closely with farmers, so in this case they're going over strawberries, so we were partnered with Driscoll's at the time, and they were really excited. And as soon as we got proof points that there was a there, we continued to invest. And so fast forward a few months, and this is what the rovers turned into. You can see them moving through the fields. And we ended up selling this technology to Driscoll's and also to John Deere, I think a year ago. Moving on. Clicker's really slow. Let's try again.
Tech, I tell you.
Tech, I know. We should come up with a moonshot for this. Oh, there we are. Okay, one more, and I think I'm going to hand over to Ivo. So this is one of our most recently announced moonshots, and it's one that I'm particularly excited about. So it's in the realm of synthetic biology. And the goal here is really to turn biology into an engineering discipline such that we can leverage biology essentially to manufacture. So if you think about biofuels, or you think about medicines, or whatever it may be that you want to create, even synthetics for clothing, imagine if you could grow these products in a lab using cellular biology instead of using chemicals and chemistry. So that's the idea behind this one. Okay, I am going to hand over to Ivo now. It's the left one.
Left. All right. Great to see everybody. Also, got to have a lab shot. I mean, how could we be a moonshot factory without the lab shot? Also, just one real quick about the loon balloon. I think that was the most beautiful robot I've ever seen, to have something that could actually ride the jet streams at 60,000 feet above airplanes and navigate itself. And then when a hurricane hits or some other area needs some help, it could just steer itself and be there. I thought it was one of those kind of things where there's six wrists stacked on top of each other that could just knock it out of the air. And we kind of figured this whole thing out. I don't think we ever invented balloons, but we industrialized how to actually float them around the world and do things, including over some countries we weren't supposed to be flying over. So we just went through a pandemic, and I think we learned pretty quickly that supply chain logistics is just still on phone calls and spreadsheets, and if it happens again, it's no better. It's a superhuman complex task, and so what if you could actually understand where everything is, what its state is in, how it's being utilized, understanding how many more you need somewhere, whether or not they're down the street and you can move them over versus ordering from Florida if you're here in Boston, but they're actually in New York. So this is our moonshot in supply chain logistics called Chorus that also spun out this year, and it has there's definitely AI technology and routing technology involved, but there's also sensors that get on packages or pallets and so forth, so that you could actually have visibility across assets as they move through all the manifests and all the change of ownership. That kind of visibility just changes the game in a lot of different ways. And so we're really excited about where it's headed and how it's doing on the outside already, working with some pretty major brands and also, at times in the past when there was a pandemic, we had nation states coming to us and say, can you help us with our vaccine delivery and so forth. So a little trend there I think you hear as we've talked about different projects. Next project here is Tapestry, which is basically an OS for the grid. That not everyone understands that X has always been, for much of its history, involved in a lot of climate sustainability projects. But a lot of times we were working on renewables, we were working on storage and stuff that would make the grid operate in a much more efficient way, or maybe part of the future. But what we realized pretty quickly is if any of this stuff came online, no one was going to plug it in. So how are you going to actually make a sustainable grid of the future? How are you going to make even opportunities that could be like 200,000 200% renewable instead of 20% or 10. And so it became a necessity for us to kind of look at it, not just for our own projects, but as the world. And when we were starting, I think there were 2-year queues for a lot of assets they're seeing, and now it's like 3- and 6-year queues. And we now have nation states coming to us say, please help us with the entire grid network, reestablish it from a maintenance perspective, but then a planning perspective, and then orchestrating and optimizing it. But really at that high level is really orchestrating and turning the dials automatically, because right now there's no longer an opportunity to hit a button and watch the electrons flow one way from something like a coal plant. It's just a different scenario. So I think you guys would all agree that what we're doing with plastics in the world is, I think our main brief on this one was, well, what's going on with plastics? It sucks. And we throw stuff in our recycle bins, and even out of all of that, 10% actually gets recycled. And usually used for secondary concepts, not back to the same use that they had prior. And we've come to depend on plastics in a long way, including for our clothing and so forth. But we haven't really figured out a way or understanding of how to utilize all the resources we've already pulled out of the ground to reuse them in a way that could be back to the virgin opportunities and brand new opportunities. So what's convening a bunch of smart people in rooms and starting with the problem statement, we came up with an understanding that we would take a molecular approach, where if we could actually identify materials at the molecular level, not saying that's black and that's blue and that's fabric, but actually get it down to molecular level, cataloging it, we could actually bring it back to the virgin opportunity and then be able to put it back into the supply stream. And these feedstocks are coming up in rapid fashion now, and a lot of people are trying to figure out, even with regulations, how to actually be part of the ecosystem like this. And so this is not just a transformation play, but it's also a data play that goes across the supply chain as it goes from raw material all the way to finished goods. So pretty unique scenario. I think we would have, a couple of years ago, we didn't know if we can do it cheaper than what you would do with plastics today, taking oil out of the ground. And just recently we figured out we can. So we would have killed the project if we couldn't be cheaper than the current market. We're not going to sit around and wait for regulatory, or sit around for even asking for consumer ideas to come around to change policy or change people's spending habits. We want to go in there and make it a market viable opportunity that makes it a win-win and the decision really easy. And then I will have regulatory and consumers come along with it. That is not the right direction. Okay. So as we do things in the grid, or we look at the environment, we also notice that it's not just energy that we're going, with the different issues that are coming up, but it's also companies' operations, supply chain included, are dealing with climate risk. And a lot of perils that come out there, no one can predict or understand what's happening or understand what it's going to take to be resilient. If you're a state in India and you get federal money every so often to say, how do you make the community more resilient to floods for the next 5 years? There is no geospatial tool or design tool to help you understand how to spend that money, what's going to be the best approach and optimization, and then make that community more resilient for any hazards that could come, and not even understand or predict what their hazard level is for the next few years. So we said this is something that enables projects that we work on and enables them to get invested in, because right now those risks are not transparent or opaque, and therefore they won't get funded, and therefore we won't have impact. And so we figure like this is an impact project that enables other impacts, including in emerging markets, because risk is just not that transparent. So we have a geospatial platform that started in fire prediction, which is now a market-leading modeling approach to understanding the predictions over 5 years where things have concerns. But now we're adding floods, hurricanes. We just did an announcement with our friends over at Google Research and Geo and DeepMind, where we did a combined opportunity on an Earth AI platform that is adding to the opportunity. And we're working with insurance companies, we're working with investors, we're working with operators. That extends to the supply chains and portfolios and a bunch of stuff that probably Harvard would be really interested in understanding, especially Harvard Business School. Okay, I keep trying. Last one.
Last one.
A lot of people talk about affordable housing and that there's a housing crisis, yet for much time it's been considered a philanthropic exercise or a subsidized concept, and it just keeps getting worse. So we've tried multiple times to get into an industry which building is really quite antiquated. Every project seems like a unique project or bespoke, and it takes years to get things developed. It takes years for municipalities to approve things because it's complicated looking at zoning laws and everything else. And so we said, how could we, from a financial perspective, figure out a model after many attempts at this that would make affordable housing actually profitable, so that any developer or public entity could actually incorporate this into their opportunities and not just think about it as only something on the sidelines. But we had to start with how we're going to do it. And so with technology and AI where it's progressed to, we think we now have a model and a way of developing things and automating zoning laws for anywhere we go into in days and weeks, not in years, where we can help people collaborate, have agreement across the table, and move forward their projects, including supply chains in timely ways. And so now we do believe that we have a model and a way of building this out that people can actually incorporate this into their planning at a profitable level. And that now brings public and private together. It brings nonprofit and profit together. And we hope that this is going to be something that really starts to become a trend, not just domestically, but internationally. And we're just on the verge of signing 2 new countries and cities in those countries to work with us. I think we are now.
Super exciting and great to have a sense of the breadth of my understanding from earlier today was a couple hundred projects come in at the top of the funnel each year, maybe 2 graduate to being full-fledged businesses funded on the outside or going back to Google. But it's great to see some of the things at various phases, whether successes or failures. But I thought, having had that overview, I know many of our students are at transition moments in their lives where they're making choices and looking at different people's journey lines and how they land where they land. So I thought maybe we could start for a moment sort of a bit more personally. And Helen, I thought we might start with you, which is, at the risk of stereotyping, I am guessing that not everyone would have predicted banker, consultant, HBS leading a huge part of this innovation factory. And I'm curious, in sort of landing where you are, what translated? Were there things you had to relearn? Can you give us a little bit of that color?
So you're saying you couldn't predict? I could not have predicted that I would land where I ended up. So honestly, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford and had focused on sort of math and physics when I did my A-levels in the UK. I had no idea what to do with my life after that. But since I was strong at math, I was like, okay, numbers, banking, like let's give it a shot. Like it really wasn't a concerted goal that I was pursuing. And I really loved my experience at Morgan Stanley, but didn't love the lifestyle and Couldn't see myself staying in it, but it was an amazing training ground. Came over to HBS because I loved being in a learning environment and wasn't getting as much learning in my professional experience at the time as an analyst in banking. And so I was super excited to come to HBS and ended up making a decision with my husband, somewhat on a whim, to stay in the States for 1 year. It was supposed to be 1 year. I graduated HBS 2001. So we decided to go to California and
More good productions.
yeah, and ended up in strategy consulting. This is 2001, dot-com crash. So it was not the best time to be in San Francisco in consulting. And so I had the chance to, again, learn some great skills, but it wasn't the most sort of rewarding experience that I'd had. And what I also found was I noticed with banking, with consulting, I would be advising other people as they were growing their businesses. And I always had this sense of, I want to grow a business. Like I want to be the one hiring the consultants as opposed to being the consultant, or I want to be the one hiring the banker as opposed to being the banker. That was just my preference. No knock on either of those careers choices. And so I leveraged the HBS network actually. So it is really valuable when I started networking and ended up being introduced to teams at Google and ended up joining. And I could almost say the rest is history. So I've been 22 years at Google now. It has been an extraordinary ride. So when I joined, Google was a few hundred people. There was just Google search, and they hadn't even come up with like the AdWords auction system. It was just banner ads, but it was a rocket ship. And I've ended up staying as long as I have. No one can predict that they're going to stay at the same company as long as they choose to. But what really kept me is, I'd say, three things. First of all, being in a growth environment creates so much opportunity. And so as the company was growing, I just kept getting pulled into 1,000 different things. And I was initially working on international expansion. So I traveled to every country that we had offices in Europe and actually worked on expanding our Google's presence throughout all of Asia Pacific, doing the analysis. Okay, where do we want to set up the office? Figuring out, okay, how do we hire people? How do we get office space? Come up with a compensation plan. I was wearing every possible hat. And so it was just this accelerated learning journey. The second thing I would say is the people. The people were just extraordinary, and the culture. I really felt like I fit and really felt that I was with a peer group that I could learn and grow with and really learn from. And the third thing I would say is just in the sort of choice of staying, it's really about the mission. The mission of Google is to do good in the world and to improve people's lives for the better. And I really felt that strongly. And so those are the things that have pulled me in. To your point around learning versus unlearning, I think one of the big transitions as Google scaled, I then moved over to Google X. And I had to unlearn a lot of the things that made me great in my job in my sort of banking consulting days. I had to unlearn when I came over to Google. And then when I switched to Google X, I had a whole other unlearning and relearning journey. And just to give you some examples, I think there's a lot of pride in the rigor and discipline around financial analysis and sort of metrics. And what I learned when I ended up at Google X is if you live by that rigor and discipline, you will kill absolutely everything. Innovation is a really delicate thing. And it's so easy to find 50 reasons not to do something or to be a naysayer. But actually the sparkle and the magic is having the vision and having the belief and seeing something different and seeing an opportunity that nobody else does. And I had to learn how to teach myself how to see that opportunity and believe in it, but yet keep one foot in the analysis to make sure that there's still accountability. And so I often sort of describe my role as at Google X as like keeping my feet on the ground and my head in the sky, and how do I actually straddle between the two. So it's been a journey, but really, really enjoyable.
It's a beautiful metaphor too. I love that. Ivo, maybe turning to you, I found it fascinating to see you have seen entrepreneurship from sort of every seat on the bus. You told me in an academic setting, you worked in the lab, you founded a company that had a successful exit, you worked running R&D at Jawbone, and you're now at X. Like, are there 2 or 3 things that have struck you about either differences or commonalities of incubating new businesses or new ideas as you've sort of seen that from different seats?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to phrase it and frame it. I guess at least a few things. You know, a lot of new ideas that have to come into the world, the way you figure out the story and the logic behind it and the understanding of how it would fit into the world is a really important part of their process. So vision and mission really matter. Whether you're starting at the really like v0.crap days or now you're at 4.0 or wherever, and understanding that pathway to getting there, understanding sometimes things get tough, you know, like you might be sometimes in that journey 3 weeks from bankruptcy or 3 weeks from like closing down a project unless we pull a rabbit out of the hat or whatever. And I think those have all been interesting lessons in the innovation side. I mentioned even with the slides, you know, a little bit of how you industrialize things. So there are a lot of good ideas in the world, and sometimes they get a little bit further in R&D or other places. But how do you really make it so they can scale and be sustainable is a journey, and takes a lot of mishits sometimes. And seeing how you might actually get to the other side of that opportunity. And what's been great is I've had the fortune and privilege to have people believe in us over time or believe in some of these ideas, and then get a chance to make mistakes and not be thrown out the door with them, and then get a chance to try again and take those learnings and, you know, figure out how to pivot or think about what next to do, or think how to add more to the platform that would extend into new markets or something else like that. So I think that's been pretty unique for me, at least, and you know, in those kind of learnings, I've had a chance to lead those kind of vision journeys, or and part of that has been because as part of getting our things to market, I was many times in the biz dev environment, out there talking to partners, bringing people to the table to understand what we're trying to do. And I love that kind of, there's field work that you do to learn from users. There's also field work you do to learn about how you work with partners to work inside of their ecosystems or the ecosystem they live in, and how you work together, align incentives, workflows, unit economics, all this other stuff. So informally, a lot of that came together as a mix and a network of how you make these things real and being able to do that. And so now we're at, you know, now fast forwarding to X, opportunity there is to really take that innovation or the stuff we used to do in labs and little war rooms, you know, to try to figure out what the next idea should be at a totally different scale. I admittedly thought I'd come to X and 6 months later they would kick me out. 10 years later, I'm still there, and and it is, to Helen's point, it's an amazing growth environment. Astro and others have seen potential. We all try to see potential in people as it comes together. He saw potential in the two of us to step in as leads there. And we've definitely embraced it and been very fortunate and privileged to have that opportunity to bring some of these impacts to the world, even though their journey in some cases, or in many cases, still is just beginning. And they're off on their own sometimes trying to figure out the rest. So, and the only other thing I'd add to that is the reason I am at XO is like, I love projects like Loon and what we're doing in affordable housing, which is called Honori, by the way, and what we do in plastic was called Matera or Tapestry on the grid. But I'm not there for any one project. I'm actually there because this is a moonshot factory. Like, how do you make innovation so it's repeatable versus just some lucky concept? And that you can do it. And to have an institution that wasn't after 5 years just shut down because the market changed, but has lived through 15 and now we're looking at the next 10. And to really work on that model is the moonshot that I get up every day for. So how we work together, how we collaborate with others, how we collaborate with industry, how we collaborate with the investment community, nation states to make that possible is really what this has led to and what I'm excited about.